Welcome to our first episode of the Industry Economic Update as we kick off 2013. I'm Alyssa Lansdowne. In 2012, we closed off the year with an annual review and a look forward on the status of the industry. It will be interesting to keep those observations in mind as we move forward into what is unfolding as a very different economic start over previous years for the industry. While Congress and President Obama were able to come to terms on a deal to avert the fiscal cliff, there are still remaining issues to be resolved in the first half of 2013. We're not out of the woods yet, as our economy faces at least 3 more fiscal cliffs. The next one looms on the horizon in late February or early March, so we can expect to see more partisan fighting over how to slash the deficit. Now let's turn our attention to one of our key metrics, the Market Demand Index. The MDI finished the year well above seasonality, although this historic improvement was relegated to the final 3 weeks of 2012. Moreover, although the finishing week of 2012, which overlapped the New Year holiday, saw seasonally positive growth in load postings, the year-end spike in the MDI was determined mainly by tighter truck capacity in December. In particular, each of the final 4 weeks of 2012 presented 5-year lows in weekly truck postings. Let's take a closer look at 2013's first MDI. January typically holds relatively flat trends for the MDI and trucking volumes as retailers work through accumulated inventories before things begin to ramp up around mid-February. However, if the recent fiscal deal in Washington succeeds in reducing economic uncertainty, we may see a stronger than usual first quarter for trucking. MDI has decreased 7% to 14.66 from 15.72. Now let's look at highlighted trends in the market. Kicking off the year, we've seen a mixed bag of stats, which is not unusual during this post-Christmas period. Load availability has increased 19%. Load searching takes a big jump of 47%. Truck availability is up 19%, and truck searching has increased by 12%. Flatbed rates have declined 3%. And now let's see how the regions are faring with some other key metrics impacting the trucking industry. As mentioned, load availability has taken a formidable jump. The regions seen here with the least load availability are highlighted in light red, while these states highlighted in light blue are experiencing a surplus in load availability. Our top states in dark blue with the most load availability are Texas. It continues to hold the top spot moving into 2013, followed by Illinois and Georgia. Top market standouts in dark red for least load availability include Montana, Nevada, and New Mexico. Truck availability has also seen a similar increase of 19%. The regions in light blue have the most truck availability, while the states highlighted in light red had the least truck availability. Since the last quarter of 2012, there still remains no change in the top 2 states with the greatest level of truck availability. Seen here in dark blue are Texas and California, and Florida joins them in the 3rd spot. The regions highlighted in dark red have the least truck availability, and this week those regions are Connecticut, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Average equipment rates closely track their usual season pattern for the final portion of the year, following their return to trend post-Hurricane Sandy, with lane rates during the final 6 weeks of the year matching closely to 2011 levels. There was some heterogeneity, however, with reefer and van rates exceeding on a year-over-year basis, while flatbed and specialized rates underperformed relative to 2011. Post-holidays, the average equipment rates have decreased slightly to $2.10 from $2.11. Flatbed rates are down 3% to $1.89 from $1.94. Specialized truck rates have increased 3% to $2.50 from $2.42. Reefer rates have decreased 1% to $2.16 from $2.18. And finally, van rates have decreased by 2% to $1.85 from $1.89. Diesel prices declined slightly in December, but remain mainly flat following their local peak of $4.03 in late November. Also of note, there has not been any return to the large divergence between diesel prices and trucking lane rates that was pronounced earlier in 2012. The national average fuel price now sits at $3.90 per gallon. The regions with the highest fuel prices hold an average of $4.17 per gallon, while the lowest are at $3.71. The fuel surcharge remained unchanged at 51.01 cents per mile. Here you'll see the regions in light blue with the highest fuel prices and those in light red with the cheapest fuel prices. Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New York in dark blue have the highest prices in the nation. And the places with the best fuel prices, seen here in dark red, are Louisiana, Nebraska, and Mississippi. Turning our attention now to the logistics and supply chain fields. They're among the largest, most vibrant, and key contributors to the U.S. economy, and world economies for that matter. With major advancements in technology, changes in infrastructure and legislation, and the driver shortage issue, this sector is undergoing significant changes. Last year in November, the ATA released a report on the critical shortage of truck drivers over the next few years as the economy recovers and demand for goods increases. The report estimated the current shortage of drivers to be in the range of 20,000 to 25,000 in the for-hire truckload market on a base of approximately 750,000 trucks. The same report went on to say if the current trend persists, the shortage would likely grow to an astounding 239,000 over the next decade. Earlier, we brought Paige Siplin, Executive Director of the Georgia Center of Innovation for Logistics, back on the show to talk more on the role that logistics and supply chain play in the economy and how the impending critical driver shortage will impact the trucking industry. Here's a look at part of that interview. Paige, what's the value of freight flow on the trucking side? And overall, can you break down the importance of the logistics and supply chain field with respect to the economy?
Sure, Alyssa. That's a great question, a great way to start off. Yeah, I guess I'd start off by saying, that logistics and supply chain, whatever word you want to use to define it, is a system. And a critical part of that system is our trucking industry. Those trucking companies move about 70% of all the tonnage that's moved throughout the United States. And about 80%, studies show, about 80% of the communities in the United States rely exclusively on trucking to serve their communities and move products to customers in those neighborhoods. It's an incredible big part of our industry and feeds a lot of other parts of our infrastructure and our supply chain that I'm sure we'll talk some more about, like our ports, like our railroads, and they're all connected in this what I call an ecosystem of supply chain that is fueled in many ways and in many places by our trucking industry. It takes about 9 million people to move those freight by trucks every year. That equals up to about 1 in 13 people are employed directly by the trucking industry.
Wow, 1 in 13. And on top of that, I don't think people realize just how much freight trucking is responsible for moving. Now, Paige, what are some of the changes the supply chain management is undergoing that will impact the trucking industry?
Yeah, there are quite a few changes that are undergoing in the supply chain industry overall. Many of them impact the trucking industry more than other parts of the supply chain ecosystem, as I called it before. I guess a couple of them that are probably the most prevalent are the regulation side, making our supply chains more efficient, but also keeping them more secure and more cost effective as well. A lot of those regulations coming from federal government as well as from state governments that vary across our country have a significant impact on our trucking industry in particular. And those are things that trucking companies are already looking at and are already dealing with and figuring out ways to be cost competitive while still dealing with the important regulations that are coming down and will continue to evolve as time goes along. The other part of the industry that is changing that, again, impacts us as consumers, but it definitely impacts the trucking industry as well, is technology. Now, technology is a big word, but technology in trucking is critical, allows truckers to be more efficient, allows them to deliver a better service to their customers by providing better supply chain visibility. Well, there's a lot of down-in-the-weeds technologies, whether it's RFID technology or temperature-controlled technologies that are impacting the trucking industry and thus impacting the supply chains overall. Those are things that the trucking industry needs to keep up with, making sure that they have the technology and the assets that can deliver those services and those technologies to the customers and the freight that they move in order to be competitive. Not just as a trucking industry, but as a nation as a whole, we need to be able to deliver those products, again, securely, efficiently, and cost effectively if we're going to continue to be a competitive nation.
That's some sound advice, Paige. Now let's switch gears a little and turn our attention to the impact driver shortage issue will have on an industry that's so heavily relied upon when it comes to freight movement. First, give us a sense of the volume of freight that trucking accounts for in the supply chain sector in America, if you don't mind.
Yeah, it's a pretty staggering number and one that's kind of hard to get your head around. But the trucking studies show, the American Trucking Association in particular, says that about 11 billion tons of cargo flow on our roads per year. That's about $670 billion worth of revenue that's generated by trucking companies here in the United States. Huge numbers, huge economy, huge strategic industry for our nation.
Staggering indeed. Now, in a recent report you wrote, you stated that U.S. companies are expected to create more than 115,000 truck driver jobs per year through 2016. Of these jobs that need to be filled just to keep up with the demand, what percentage of people are actually considering this vocation?
That's another great question. So that 115,000 jobs that we wrote in our report obviously just talks about the truck driver jobs. I would add, just for clarity, that truck driving, that is just the drivers alone. The truck driving industry includes mechanics. It involves technology. It involves a lot of different pieces of the puzzle to make trucking work. The drivers are obviously a critical part of that. Now, so 115,000 truck drivers is what are the job openings that the Department of Labor expects to see per year over the next period of years. That's a huge number. And reflective of our growing economy and the importance that logistics and trucking and supply chains play in moving cargo. I would add, though, to put that in context, that's about half of the total amount of logistics jobs that are going to be created, the openings in the United States. So our study shows that about 270,000 jobs per year, if you add in things like air cargo supervisors and supply chain managers, and a 6 very specific subgroups that you can read in the report. But 270,000 jobs overall, of which about half, or 115,000, as you said, are going to come from truck driving. So how are we going to meet that demand? Like most things in logistics, it's about supply and demand. And we talked a little bit about that already with some of the freight flows we have at our doorstep. But so the demand side is those 115,000, just to put it in context. The supply side is the question we need to ask, and frankly, we need to do a lot of work. How are we going to meet that demand overall for supply chain jobs? And specifically, how are we going to find the drivers to sit in the seats of those trucks to be able to move those products to customers throughout the United States and Canada and Mexico as well? It's an important part that we can't forget about. The study we did was of those 115,000 jobs, only about 10% of those jobs are going to be trained through our technical college system. So about 15,000 completions per year, completions of these certificates through our technical colleges will be generated throughout the United States. If we take that to that bigger number of 270,000 jobs, really only about 28% of those completions are going to come through our technical college system. So we've got a big gap between our supply and demand. 270,000 jobs, only 28% of those are going to be completed certificates, or 115,000 truck drivers, only about 10% are going to come with completed certificates through our truck driving programs. So that's a big challenge and something we need to focus on and again, invest in as a nation to be able to meet that demand.
Since it's increasingly harder to fill these positions, and the ATA recently released a report warning that we're headed towards a critical shortage of truck drivers over the next few years, in your opinion, what should be done to avoid this issue?
I would say, though, as a business, and this varies company to company, so this isn't exact advice, but company to company, they need to start sharpening their pencils and looking at their customers and which customers are more cost competitive. And sometimes you have to fire customers. And I know in a tough economy that's difficult. But in many ways, if you have a driver shortage and you can't afford to service that customer the way they need to be serviced, you need to start looking at other ways and other customers and other markets of products to haul that you can afford and staff with drivers. So I would say that it's not just looking at counting up your drivers. It's also looking at your customers and the markets and the commodities that you serve and figuring out ways to drive up your profits, to drive up your margins, to be more cost competitive as well. And with that, you generate more revenue and then can hopefully hire more drivers and other important assets for your supply chain. But there's different perspectives, and that's just one of them that we need to look at to handle driver shortages. But again, it's a complicated problem with unfortunately a complicated answer.
That was Paige Siplin, Executive Director of the Georgia Center of Innovation for Logistics. You can catch the full interview on Tuesday, January 15th at bigtrucktv.com, truckstop.com, and truckload.org. And now back to the regional report. Inbound rates have decreased 3% to $2.03 from $2.09 per mile. Outbound rates have also decreased 3%, taking them to $1.96 from $2.02 per mile. The states with the highest inbound rates had an average of $2.50 per mile. The regions in light red saw higher than average rates per mile for inbound. On the other end, the regions in light blue with the lowest inbound rates hold an average of $1.72 per mile. These three regions, seen here in dark red, Rhode Island, Maine, and New Hampshire, have the highest inbound rates, while Iowa, Arizona, and Missouri, highlighted in dark blue, have the lowest inbound rates in the nation. The highest average outbound rates were at $2.27 per mile, with the regions in light red paying more than average. Meanwhile, the lowest, highlighted in light blue, had an average outbound rate of $1.64 per mile, a discrepancy of 63 cents per mile. The regions highlighted in dark red with the highest outbound rates are Illinois, Ohio, and Indiana. The regions with the lowest rates in dark blue are Florida, Maryland, and Montana. Now let's turn our attention to turnaround times. Load turnaround increased by 1% to 209 from 206 minutes, whereas truck turnaround increased by 3% to 168 from 163 minutes. The regions in light red seen here have the fastest truck turnaround time with an average of 141 minutes. And here you can see the regions in light blue with the slowest truck turnaround times with an average of 232 minutes. That's a discrepancy of 91 minutes. The top three truck turnaround times in dark red were Vermont, Iowa, and New Jersey, while slowest, seen here in dark blue, are Utah, Colorado, and California. And the regions in light red had an average fastest load turnaround time of 170 minutes, while the light blue ones averaged a slower 268 minutes. The best load turnaround times in dark red were Washington, D.C., New Jersey, and Massachusetts, while the regions with the slowest load turnaround times in dark blue are Kentucky, New Mexico, and West Virginia. And now on to our final segment, the Credit Score Report. The weekly credit score index has remained flat. It stands still at 26.43 days. In other news, the Purchasing Managers Index has been released and it's increased 2.42%. In December, it's moved up to 50.7 from 49.5 in November. During the last few months, the PMI has hovered around the key 50.0 threshold, representing expansionary manufacturing activity, with overall production remaining relatively suppressed. Can we take a collective sigh of relief as we move into 2013? Despite some very uncertain times, the economy did manage to grow, and unemployment has not taken any sudden leaps upward. Has Congress and the executive branch sobered up after drinking from the partisan cup for too long? Do they now understand the need to collectively work together to bring a resolution to cutting the deficit in a manner that still enables growth? Well, the forecasts for 2013 are for modest growth, but there are still many factors that can derail this. In other economic news, one area that continues to add fire to the driver shortage dilemma is the Bureau of Labor Statistics' recent report, released last week. It disclosed 155,000 jobs were added during December, with the national unemployment rate remaining unchanged at 7.8%. However, the key portion for trucking is that manufacturers and construction firms added, respectively, 25,000 and 30,000 workers to their payrolls. This underscores that a reduction in potential truck drivers will be an important factor during 2013. This highlights our earlier comments from Paige Siplin. For more news, discussions, and polls on the economy and the state of the trucking industry, be sure to check out our Industry Economic Update LinkedIn group. And that's our look at the Industry Economic Update. I'm Alyssa Lansdowne for Big Truck TV and Transforecast. See you next time.